Sure, I helped make the beds, I helped do the vacuuming, and I helped do this, and eventually I did that, and eventually got a little more. Eventually I started getting into the kitchen.
So it was a very full time. I was busy all the time. I got my hour-long break in the morning when the nurses were here. But the rest of the time I was pretty busy, you know, keeping things going, cooking, cleaning, shopping, looking after business.
The big challenge, though, is the mental challenge, the ability to handle stress, to handle all the emotions that one goes through.
One of the things that was important for me, for Courtney, and for all of our friends, actually, and we had a wide network of friends, and a lot of family from a distance who were concerned about us. And one of the big things was that I really didn't have the energy or the time to talk on the phone to people. I really just did not want to have repeated conversations about how we were doing and just all of the details. It was just too much effort. So what I decided to do was to do a regular email to friends. And so I would do that maybe once or twice a week, and I'd update them on what we were doing, how we were doing, what was happening.
Now, I had a full-time job, and that was itself extremely stressful. Full-time job there, essentially full-time job at home. And most of the time I had to be in both places at once, and you know, that's not possible. But that was one of the obstacles and I had to work around that. And that was, thankfully, I had a very understanding boss, and I had understanding fellow workers, and I'll say understanding students. Students, I made that clear to students at the start, that there was times I wouldn't be in the office.
I guess another thing that I felt was really missing, that really would have helped us, would have been to be able to have my family doctor or some other medical person come out here, rather than us having to make all the trips into town. Especially, for example, when say when Courtney was going for a pain management assessment. You know, he was in a lot of pain, so we had to go through that whole thing of the transfers in and out of the car so many times, and you know, a number of hours away from home, and that was hard.
I did receive support after Bill passed away through my friends and my family, through my church. They say the three most important things in life are your faith, family, and friends, and it's true, and especially after a loss.
Friends and family support was phone calls, email, visits, definitely sympathy cards. And I find those, my husband passed away 6 months ago, just over 6 months ago, and I really appreciate rereading the individual notes that they sent.
And I had family support, and I had support from a couple, well, one lady in particular who had MS. And this was weird because she had a practice of phoning other MS patients, and she used to phone Doreen. They became quite good friends. They never did meet each other face to face. But anyway, she'd phone sometimes, Doreen would be asleep, and get talking to me. And she was a tremendous support. And that's very true. She was, you know, on the many days she was flat on her back in bed, but she could still pick up the phone. And she was an inspiration, just a real inspiration.
I found it very difficult after Courtney died to deal with people's comment, "How are you doing?" I call it the default question. The question that really has no answer, and it's a reflex comment by a lot of people. It's automatic. We all do it. I do it. I try to stop myself from doing it now because I know how hard it is to deal with that question for me. So actually a month after Courtney died, I had to go to a family wedding in Montreal, and I knew I would be inundated with that question. So I told my family, look, just prepare everybody. Don't ask that question. Say anything else. Say, so great you could make it, lovely to see you, or I'm sorry for your loss. That is a powerful statement and really hits home for a bereaved caregiver, I think.
Often the person who's caregiver by nature and is the practical and emotional support person for the person the loved one who's dying, may also mean that they're the least likely to accept support. So you may have to prod a little bit and really get to know the person well.
You don't realize in a marriage what your job description is until you don't have the other person. So learning to fix things physically and looking after the car, getting oil changes, all the everyday things that usually the men do, or often the men do, I was responsible for all of it. So in that way it's quite exhausting, but I realized that I can't do everything myself. No one knows how to do everything, so I ask for help. And my husband has 8 brothers, so they're quite helpful.
It was overwhelming. A lot of things were overwhelming. And all the first steps that one has to deal with after somebody dies, you know, the life insurance, the death insurance, the dealing with lawyers and accountants and whatever. I didn't really trust myself in those early days that I was very sharp. I had a lot of what I call brain fog. And I would often take somebody with me to meetings just to make sure I heard everything correctly, and then they could help me do whatever needed to be done. And what was it like for me to lose Courtney? I lost not only my life partner, I had a double whammy. I also lost my job at the same time. So I was grieving both things. For 25 years, we had worked together and lived together. And suddenly I had to reinvent myself on a lot of different levels.
Because the one problem that I had was a big hole in my life. You know, I'd visited her every day, gone over to Stenger Lodge, and I'd take the paper and read it to her and so on. All of a sudden.
When he passed away, it was a feeling of relief. And I'm not being disrespectful. I think it was a loving thing, because you could see that it wasn't going to get better. It was going to get more intense. It was not going to get better. It was going to get worse.
I was with her, she died in my arms, and my first feeling, and I feel guilty about it, was relief. Not so much for myself, but the fact that she finally was at rest. And that was the thing I think that I thought back of so often was, this is hard to say, the look on her face after she passed away. Total calm, and she hadn't had that look for years. But all the lines were out of her face, and she wasn't smiling or anything, but she just looked totally at peace.
So I think that that's one of the big issues in the bereavement process, is that it can take the longest time, and we need, as caregivers and as professionals, I think, we need to try to understand that better. I've actually had a recent experience just last week with a friend who is 22 years into being a widow. And she said, you know, every June I get like this. It's like I'm kicked off my center. I feel like I'm in another world. And I found that so powerful to realize that, you know, what is happening here, even that long time later? What is it? Where do we store our grief in our bodies? What does that look like?
Some of the people that you deal with after the burial, then you have to deal with some of the legal things, some of the papers, some of the challenges. And I personally had people that I talked to on the phone I told them they were very unprofessional and disrespectful of me suffering as a recent widow.
The support and the help and the understanding non-judgmentally that can be provided in hearing their story and hearing about the person who died as well. Using the name of the person who died is something in our society that still people avoid, are death denying to some extent, or grief avoiding, and so acknowledging their loss and understanding from really getting to know them, who they are and what this relationship meant to them, can pave the way for a helping relationship.
But after the patient dies, we expect people to come back to work in 5 days. Who's ready? If it's your loved one, if it's your spouse, you might not be ready, you might be ready, but we have to be flexible. So we have to be flexible across the spectrum of caregiving and into bereavement.